The dust-filled air of Montana Territory in 1878 carried the scent of freedom as Clara Sutton's bare feet pounded through the tall grass, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild mustang. Blood trickled from her split lip, and bruises blossomed across her arms, silent testimonies to what she was fleeing. The rising sun painted the sky in shades of amber and gold, casting long shadows across the sprawling wheat fields of the Blackwell estate as Clara ran for her life, her wedding dress torn and mudded from the night she'd spent hiding in the barn. Clara had been sold like cattle to Edmund Blackwell, a wealthy rancher with a reputation for cruelty that stretched across 3 counties. At 20 years old, she had watched her father sign away her future for enough money to save their failing farm, not knowing the beast he was condemning her to. Last night, on what should have been her wedding night, she had seen the true face of her husband, and she had chosen freedom or death over a life in his chains. The fence that marked the border of Blackwell's property loomed ahead. Her lungs burned with each desperate breath as she pushed forward. If she could just make it beyond his land, perhaps she could disappear, find work in one of the growing frontier towns, or travel east where no one knew her name. As she approached the fence, a silhouette materialized against the dawn sky. A man, broad-shouldered and tall, sat atop a chestnut stallion. Clara's heart sank. Had Blackwell's men found her already? She slowed, considering whether to change direction when the stranger dismounted and took a step toward her, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "You're free now," he said, his voice deep but gentle as a summer breeze. "I've been watching Blackwell's place waiting for you." Clara stopped, her chest heaving, suspicion flaring in her eyes. "Who are you? How did you know I'd come this way?" The man pushed back his hat, revealing kind eyes the color of a clear Montana sky. "Name's Thomas Yates. I run the neighboring ranch, and I've been keeping an eye on Blackwell since he bought that land." He gestured to her bruised face. "I've seen what happens to folks who cross him." "When I heard he was bringing home a bride." He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "Let's just say I figured you might need a friend." Clara took a step back, wary. "How do I know you're not working for him?" Thomas's expression hardened. "Edmund Blackwell killed my sister 3 years ago. Beat her to death when she was working as his housekeeper. Law did nothing. Said there wasn't enough evidence." He approached the fence and opened a small gate. "I've been waiting for a chance to bring him down ever since." Something in his voice, raw pain mingled with quiet determination, convinced Clara he was telling the truth. She stepped through the gate, wincing as a sharp stone cut into her bare foot. "You're bleeding," Thomas observed, concern creasing his brow. "I've had worse," Clara replied, straightening her shoulders despite the exhaustion threatening to overtake her. Thomas nodded, respecting her strength. "My cabin's about 2 miles east. You'll be safe there until we figure out what to do. Can you ride?" Clara nodded, thinking of the countless hours she'd spent on horseback at her family's farm in Kansas before drought and debt had forced them west. Thomas helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her, careful to maintain a respectful distance as he reached around her for the reins. "Why help me?" Clara asked as the horse began moving at a gentle trot. "You don't even know me." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Because nobody helped Eliza when she needed it most, and because folks out here have to look out for each other if we want to survive." As they rode toward the rising sun, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in too long, she was riding toward it by choice rather than being dragged into it by fate's cruel hand. Thomas's cabin was modest but well built, nestled against a grove of pine trees with a small creek running nearby. A vegetable garden flourished beside it, and a few chickens scratched in the yard. It wasn't grand, but to Clara's eyes it looked like paradise. "It's not much," Thomas said as he helped her dismount, "but it's mine, free and clear." "It's beautiful," Clara replied honestly. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly tidy for a bachelor's dwelling. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and simple, sturdy furniture filled the space. Thomas gestured to a rocking chair. "Sit," he said. "I'll heat some water for those cuts." Clara sank gratefully into the chair, the events of the last 24 hours crashing over her like a wave. She had actually done it, she had escaped, but reality quickly tempered her relief. Blackwell would be looking for her by now, and he wasn't a man who tolerated defiance. Thomas returned with a basin of warm water and some clean rags. "I've got a spare room in the back," he said, kneeling beside her to tend to her wounded feet. "My sister used it when before." He cleared his throat. "It's yours for as long as you need it." His hands were gentle as he cleaned the dirt and blood from her feet, and Clara studied him surreptitiously. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-bronzed skin and a few days' worth of beard shadowing his strong jaw. His dark hair curled slightly where it fell across his forehead, and there was a quiet steadiness to him that Clara found comforting. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there." Thomas looked up, his blue eyes meeting hers. "You would have found a way. You strike me as a survivor, Miss Sutton." "Clara," she corrected. "Please call me Clara." A slight smile curved his lips. "Clara, then." After cleaning her wounds and providing her with some of his sister's old clothes, Thomas gave Clara privacy to change and rest. The room was simple but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a handmade quilt, a small dresser, and a window that looked out over the rolling prairie. Clara changed out of her ruined wedding dress with a profound sense of relief, as if she were shedding not just fabric but the life that had been forced upon her. She slept deeply for the first time in weeks, awakening only when the afternoon sun was hanging low in the sky. The smell of cooking food drew her to the main room where she found Thomas at the stove. "You must be starving," he said, turning as she entered. "I've made stew, nothing fancy, but it'll fill your stomach." They ate together at his small table, and gradually, Clara shared the story of how she had come to be Blackwell's bride. How her father, desperate to save their farm after 3 years of drought, had accepted Blackwell's offer of a substantial sum in exchange for Clara's hand. How she had objected but ultimately submitted to save her family. How her mother had wept as Clara departed for Montana territory with a man she barely knew. "And last night," Thomas asked gently. "What happened?" Clara stared into her stew, her appetite suddenly gone. He said he wanted to break me in properly. Those were his words, like I was one of his horses." Her hands trembled around her spoon. "When I resisted, he hit me. Said he'd paid good money for me and he'd do as he pleased. He'd been drinking. I managed to get away when he passed out, hid in the barn until dawn, and then I ran." Thomas's knuckles whitened around his fork, but his voice remained calm. "You're safe now. Blackwell won't find you here." "But he'll look," Clara said. "And my father, he took Blackwell's money." "I've broken a contract. A contract made without your consent for something that should never be for sale," Thomas replied, his voice hardening. "No court in this territory would uphold it, and as for Blackwell..." He set down his fork. "Let him look. I've been waiting 3 years for a reason to face him." "I won't have you risking your life for me," Clara said firmly. "I've caused enough trouble." "The trouble was here long before you arrived," Thomas assured her. "Besides, I'm not planning anything foolish. I know Blackwell's reach. But I also know the law won't touch him without evidence of wrongdoing. You being here might be exactly what we need to finally bring him to justice." They discussed options late into the evening. Clara could not simply disappear. Her family would worry, and Blackwell's influence in the territory was too great. She needed to establish her independence legally, but without funds or family support, her options were limited. "What skills do you have?" Thomas asked as they sat by the fire. Clara thought for a moment. "I can read and write well enough. I kept the books for our farm. I can cook, sew, garden, nothing special." "That's more than many have out here," Thomas observed. "The town of Silver Creek is growing fast. They're looking for a schoolteacher." "The last one left to get married last spring." Hope flickered in Clara's chest. "You think they might hire me?" "It's worth trying. The town's small enough that Blackwell doesn't have much influence there, but big enough that you could build a life." He stoked the fire thoughtfully. "We'll ride in tomorrow, see if we can speak to the town council." That night, Clara lay in the narrow bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the prairie night. Coyotes called in the distance, and the wind whispered through the pine trees outside her window. She thought of her parents, wondering if they knew yet that she had fled. Would they understand? Or would they see only the money lost, the shame brought upon their name, and then there was Thomas. A stranger who had risked his own safety to help her, who had offered sanctuary without asking for anything in return. There was something in his eyes when he spoke of his sister, a deep, abiding grief that resonated with Clara's own losses. Different circumstances, same pain. Morning came with a knock on her door. Thomas had already been up for hours, tending to his small herd of cattle and completing the daily chores that kept his ranch running. "I've saddled the horses," he said when Clara emerged, dressed in his sister's simple blue dress. "It's about an hour's ride to Silver Creek." The town was smaller than Clara had expected, but bustling with the energy of a place finding its identity. A wide main street was lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and various other businesses. People moved about their daily routines, nodding greetings to Thomas as he and Clara rode past. "Not much to look at," Thomas admitted as they tied their horses outside the town's one-room schoolhouse, "but good people mostly. Hard workers trying to build something lasting." The schoolhouse was empty, the summer break still in progress, but Thomas led Clara to a small building with a sign identifying it as the mayor's office. Inside, they found a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose, poring over a stack of papers. "Mayor Wilson," Thomas said by way of greeting. The mayor looked up, his face brightening. "Thomas, good to see you, son. What brings you to town today?" Thomas introduced Clara, carefully explaining that she was his sister's friend from back east who had come west seeking employment. He made no mention of Blackwell or her flight, a precaution they had agreed upon beforehand. Mayor Wilson studied Clara with interest. "We've been without a teacher for months now. The children are running wild and the parents are at their wits' end. You say you have some education," Clara nodded. "I completed 8 grades in Kansas, sir. I can teach reading, writing, arithmetic, and basic sciences. I also know some history and literature." Wilson seemed impressed. "That's more than most around here can claim." "The position doesn't pay much, $30 a month plus lodging in the rooms above the schoolhouse." "That would be more than sufficient," Clara said, hardly believing her luck. "When can you start?" Wilson asked. "Immediately," Clara replied, feeling a weight lifting from her shoulders. "Though I'll need a few days to prepare lessons." "School's set to begin in 2 weeks," Wilson said. "That should give you enough time to settle in and get ready. The last teacher left her books and materials, so you'll have something to work with." As they left the mayor's office, Clara could hardly contain her excitement. "I can't believe it was that easy," she whispered to Thomas. His expression was more guarded. "It's a good first step," he agreed, "but we need to be careful. Blackwell has friends everywhere. Until we know who we can trust, it's best if you stay at my ranch." Clara nodded, understanding the wisdom in his caution. But as they walked down the main street, a commotion near the saloon caught their attention. A group of riders had just arrived, dust still settling around their horses. And at their center, his face twisted with rage, was Edmund Blackwell himself. Thomas pulled Clara into the shadow of the general store's awning, his body instinctively shielding hers. "Keep your head down," he murmured. "Don't let him see your face." Clara's heart pounded as she watched her would-be husband dismount. Even at this distance, she could see the fury in his movements, the way he scanned the street like a predator seeking prey. His normally immaculate appearance was disheveled, as if he had ridden hard without rest. "He's asking about me," Clara whispered, seeing Blackwell accost a passerby, gesturing angrily. "We need to leave," Thomas said grimly. "Now." But before they could move, one of Blackwell's men spotted them and pointed in their direction. Blackwell turned, his cold eyes narrowing as he recognized Clara even in her changed clothes. "There she is," he roared, starting toward them. "That's my wife." Thomas reacted instantly, pulling Clara toward their horses. "Run," he urged. "Get on your horse and ride east back to the ranch." "I'll hold them off." "I won't leave you," Clara protested, but Thomas was already pushing her toward her mount. "Go," he insisted. "I know these people, they know me. He can't just shoot me in the street, but he might take you if he catches you." Recognizing the logic in his words, Clara swung into the saddle and spurred her horse into motion, looking back only once to see Thomas standing his ground as Blackwell and his men approached, the townspeople beginning to gather around the unfolding drama. Clara rode hard, the wind whipping tears from her eyes as she followed the trail back to Thomas's ranch. Her mind raced with fear not for herself, but for the man who had put himself between her and danger without hesitation. What would Blackwell do to him? What story would Thomas tell to explain her presence? And what would happen when Blackwell inevitably followed her to the ranch? The answers to these questions would have to wait. For now, all Clara could do was ride, and pray that the kindness of a stranger wouldn't cost him his life. The sun was beginning its descent when Clara reached the ranch. She quickly unsaddled her horse and led it to the small corral, her hands shaking as she removed the tack. Inside the cabin, she paced anxiously, wondering what was happening in town, if Thomas was safe, and what she should do if Blackwell arrived before him. Her eyes fell on a rifle mounted above the fireplace. She had fired her father's shotgun before to scare off predators from their chickens. Could she use this weapon if needed? Would she have the courage to protect herself? The sound of approaching hoofbeats sent her heart racing. Clara grabbed the rifle and checked that it was loaded, just as Thomas had shown her that morning before they left. Positioning herself beside the window, she peered out cautiously, relaxing only when she recognized Thomas's tall figure on horseback alone. She threw open the door as he dismounted, relief washing over her. "Thank God you're safe," she breathed. "What happened? Did he hurt you?" Thomas shook his head, leading his horse to the barn. He tried to throw his weight around, but Sheriff Miller was there. Even Blackwell knows better than to cause too much trouble in front of the law. He began removing his horse's saddle. "I told them you were my cousin, come to stay after being widowed back east. Said I'd never heard of any marriage between you and Blackwell." "And they believed you?" Clara asked, helping him with the tack. "Miller did, or at least pretended to. He's no friend of Blackwell's." Thomas hung the saddle over the stall door, but Blackwell was furious. "He claims you stole valuables before running off, says he has a right to reclaim his property." The disgust in Thomas's voice was evident. Clara's stomach churned. "I took nothing but the clothes on my back." "I know that, and so does anyone with sense," Thomas replied. "But he's trying to build a legal case against you. The sheriff told him if he has proof of theft, he should file charges properly. That bought us some time, but not much." They returned to the cabin, both aware that their situation had become more precarious. Blackwell now knew where Clara was hiding, and he had resources and connections they could only guess at. "We need to establish that you never legally became his wife," Thomas said as they sat at his table, mugs of coffee cooling before them. "If there was no legal marriage, his claims have no foundation." Clara thought back to the hurried ceremony at Blackwell's ranch. "There was a minister or someone claiming to be one. I signed something, but it all happened so fast. My father wasn't even there, he had already returned to Kansas with the money." "Do you know if the marriage was recorded with the territorial authorities?" Thomas asked. Clara shook her head. "I don't know. Everything was arranged by Blackwell. The ceremony was only 3 days ago." Thomas considered this. If it wasn't properly recorded, or if the person who performed it wasn't actually authorized to conduct marriages, it might not be legal. We'll need to check the records in Helena. "That's a long journey," Clara observed. "I know someone who can help us," Thomas said. "A lawyer in Bozeman who helped me secure my land claim. I'll write to him tonight." As darkness fell, they prepared a simple dinner together. the domestic routine providing a strange comfort amidst their uncertainty. Thomas showed Clara how to make biscuits the way his mother had taught him, and Clara contributed by preparing a rabbit stew with herbs from his garden. The simple act of cooking together created a momentary illusion of normalcy that both were reluctant to break. "Tell me about your sister," Clara said as they ate, curious about the woman whose clothes she now wore. Thomas's expression softened with memory. "Eliza was everything good in this world. Smart, kind, stubborn as a mule when she believed in something." He smiled faintly. "After our parents died of fever, it was just the two of us. I was 19, she was 16. We came west together, worked whatever jobs we could find until I saved enough for this place." "How did she come to work for Blackwell?" Clara asked gently. Thomas's jaw tightened. His first wife had just died of fever, he claimed, though there were whispers. He needed a housekeeper and the pay was good, better than anything else available to a single woman out here. He stared into his stew. "I begged her not to take the job. Something about Blackwell always seemed wrong, but Eliza was determined to help me save for the ranch, said it would only be for a few months." Clara reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "I'm so sorry, Thomas." He nodded, turning his hand to briefly clasp hers before withdrawing. "After she died, I swore I'd find a way to bring Blackwell to justice, but he's protected by money, by powerful friends. No one would testify against him, even though everyone knew what had happened. And now I've appeared on your doorstep, giving you another reason to fight him," Clara said quietly. Thomas looked up, his blue eyes intense. "You're not a burden, Clara. You're perhaps the first real chance I've had to expose him for what he is." The next few days fell into an unexpected rhythm. During the day, Thomas tended to his ranch while Clara prepared lesson plans for her teaching position, using the books Mayor Wilson had sent out with a friendly shopkeeper. In the evenings, they shared meals and conversation, slowly learning the contours of each other's lives, dreams, and sorrows. Clara discovered that Thomas had a passion for books, evidenced by the small but cherished collection on his shelves. He learned that she could play the piano and had once dreamed of becoming a composer before practicality had redirected her ambitions toward teaching. They were careful to maintain appropriate distance, conscious of the impropriety of their living arrangement, yet neither could deny the growing connection between them. It was present in the way Thomas's eyes lingered on Clara as she hummed while washing dishes, in the way her heart quickened when their hands accidentally brushed, in the conversations that stretched late into the night because neither wanted to say goodnight. But underlying these peaceful days was the constant awareness of danger. Thomas took to carrying his pistol whenever he worked outside, and Clara practiced loading and firing the rifle until her aim was sure. They developed signals and plans for what to do if Blackwell's men appeared, and Thomas arranged for a trusted ranch hand to stay in the barn at night as an extra precaution. A week after their confrontation in town, a letter arrived from Thomas's lawyer friend in Bozeman. The news was encouraging. According to territorial records, no marriage between Edmund Blackwell and Clara Sutton had been officially registered. If the ceremony had been performed by an ordained minister, there would still be a grace period during which the documentation could be filed. But without Clara's consent to the union, the marriage could potentially be invalidated. "This is good," Thomas said, reading the letter for a third time. "It gives us a legal avenue to pursue." Clara was less optimistic. "Will the law truly protect me against a man like Blackwell? Your sister's case suggests otherwise." "The situations are different," Thomas insisted. "In Eliza's case, it was her word against his, and he swallowed hard. She wasn't alive to tell her side, but you are, and we have witnesses to the bruises he gave you, evidence of his character." Clara wished she could share his confidence. "Even if the law sides with me, he won't simply let me go. Men like Blackwell don't lose gracefully." Her words proved prophetic the very next day. They were returning from checking fence lines on the far edge of Thomas's property when they spotted smoke rising from the direction of the cabin. "No," Thomas breathed, spurring his horse forward. Clara followed, dread coiling in her stomach. They arrived to find the barn engulfed in flames, Thomas's ranch hand struggling to control the panicked horses that had escaped the blaze. Of the cabin, only the stone chimney remained standing amidst charred timbers and smoking debris. Thomas dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, running toward what remained of his home with a cry of anguish that tore at Clara's heart. Everything he had built, every memento of his family, every book he had cherished, all gone. The ranch hand, a weathered man named Sam, approached Clara as she dismounted. "It was Blackwell's men," he reported grimly. "6 of them rode in just after noon. I was out with the herd or I'd have seen them sooner. By the time I got back, they'd already set the fires. Said to tell you both that this is just the beginning." Thomas stood amidst the ruins of his home, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Clara went to him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Thomas, I'm so sorry. This is my fault." He turned to her, his face streaked with soot and his eyes reflecting the smoldering ruins. "No, this is Blackwell's doing, not yours, never yours." "What will we do now?" she asked, surveying the destruction. Everything they had planned, all their careful preparations gone up in smoke. Thomas straightened his shoulders, a new resolve hardening his features. "We'll go to Silver Creek. You'll take up your teaching position early and I'll speak with Sheriff Miller. This was arson, plain and simple. Even Blackwell can't escape the law for something so blatant." They salvaged what they could from the ruins, which wasn't much, and rode to town as the sun began to set, the glow of the dying fire behind them like a malevolent eye watching their retreat. Clara felt the weight of guilt pressing down on her shoulders. Thomas had lost everything because he had chosen to help her. How could she ever make that right? Sheriff Miller listened gravely to their account, his weathered face thoughtful. "I've been waiting for Blackwell to overreach himself," he said when they finished. "Burning out a respected rancher might just be it. I'll ride out first thing tomorrow, see the damage for myself, then pay Mr. Blackwell a visit." Mayor Wilson, upon hearing of their situation, immediately offered Clara the schoolteacher's lodgings above the schoolhouse. "It's meant to be yours anyway," he said kindly. "Might as well move in now. The rooms are furnished, though simply." For Thomas, the options were fewer. The town's small hotel was his only real choice, but his funds were limited after the loss of his home and livestock. "I've got a proposition for you, Thomas," Sheriff Miller said as they stood outside his office. "My deputy left last month to try his luck in the gold fields. I've been meaning to hire a new one. The pay's not much, but there's a room in the back of the jail you could use until you get back on your feet." Thomas hesitated. "I've no experience as a lawman." "You've got a good head on your shoulders and you know right from wrong," Miller replied. "That's most of what's needed. The rest I can teach you." With few alternatives, Thomas accepted. The arrangement would allow him to stay in town near Clara while they worked to resolve her situation with Blackwell. That night, Clara sat alone in her new lodgings, the simple rooms above the schoolhouse feeling cavernous without Thomas's reassuring presence. Through the window, she could see the jail where he would be sleeping, just across the street and down a ways. So close, yet it felt like miles. She unpacked the few belongings she had salvaged: a hairbrush, a shawl that had been in her saddlebag, the books for teaching that had thankfully been with them when the fire started. Everything else she owned in the world had gone up in flames. A soft knock at her door startled her. She approached cautiously, relief flooding through her when Thomas's voice called softly from the other side. "I brought you something to eat," he said when she opened the door, holding up a basket. "Mrs. Wilson from the boarding house sent it over when she heard what happened." Clara invited him in, conscious of propriety but unwilling to turn him away. They sat at the small table by the window, sharing bread, cheese, and dried fruit by the light of a single lamp. "How are you really doing?" Clara asked, noting the shadows under his eyes. Thomas was quiet for a moment. "I keep thinking about my father's watch that was on the mantel, my mother's Bible, Eliza's shawl that still smelled like her." His voice caught. "Things that can't be replaced. Clara reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "I'm so sorry, Thomas." "If I had never come to your door, don't," he interrupted firmly. "I don't regret helping you, not for a moment." Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted in the air between them. Thomas's hand turned, his fingers intertwining with hers, and Clara felt her heart skip a beat. "I should go," he said softly, though he made no move to withdraw his hand. "People will talk if I stay too long." "Let them talk," Clara replied, surprising herself with her boldness. "We've done nothing wrong." Thomas smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen since they discovered the fire. "No, we haven't. But your reputation matters, especially now that you're to be the town's teacher." Reluctantly, they said their goodbyes, both aware that something fundamental had changed between them. What had begun as an act of kindness, of one stranger helping another, had deepened into something neither had anticipated or sought, but which neither could deny. The next morning, Sheriff Miller rode out to investigate the fire, and Thomas began his duties as deputy. Clara spent the day organizing the schoolroom, grateful for the distraction of work. The school was a simple one-room building with rows of rough-hewn desks facing a larger desk and blackboard at the front. Books were scarce, but she found a small collection of readers, arithmetic primers, and a few battered history and science texts. By mid-afternoon, word had spread through town that the new schoolteacher had arrived early, and curious mothers began appearing with their children in tow, eager to meet the woman who would be educating their offspring. Clara welcomed them warmly, discussing her plans for the school year and learning the names and ages of her future pupils. One mother, a kind-faced woman named Sarah Jensen, lingered after the others had left. "I heard about what happened to Mr. Yates's ranch," she said. "And there are rumors about why," Clara tensed. "What kind of rumors?" "That Edmund Blackwell is behind it, that he's claiming you as his wife." Sarah's eyes were sympathetic. "I don't mean to pry, but my husband works at the Mercantile. He hears things." Clara hesitated, unsure how much to reveal, but something in Sarah's open expression encouraged honesty. Briefly, she explained her situation, the arranged marriage, her escape, and Blackwell's pursuit. Sarah listened without judgment. "My sister was in a similar situation back in Ohio," she said when Clara finished. "Different circumstances, same problem, a man who believed he owned her." She reached out and squeezed Clara's hand. "You'll find friends here, Miss Sutton. Not everyone is afraid of Blackwell." This small show of support meant more to Clara than Sarah could know. Until that moment, she had felt isolated in her struggle, with only Thomas standing beside her. The knowledge that others might rally to her cause gave her renewed hope. Sheriff Miller returned at dusk, his expression grim as he entered the jail where Thomas was working. Clara, who had been bringing them both dinner from the boarding house, arrived in time to hear his report. "It was arson, all right," Miller confirmed. "Found coal oil cans in the brush nearby. Tracks from multiple horses." He hung his hat on a peg by the door. "I rode on to Blackwell's ranch afterward. He denied everything, of course, said he was in Helena on business yesterday." "And you believe that?" Thomas asked incredulously. "Course not," Miller snorted. "But he's got 3 men willing to swear he was with them all day, and without witnesses placing him or his men at your ranch." He shook his head. "It's his word against ours." Clara set the food on the desk. "So he gets away with it, again." "For now," Miller conceded. "But men like Blackwell eventually make mistakes. Our job is to be ready when he does." They ate together, discussing strategies. Miller had sent telegrams to neighboring towns, asking about the legality of Clara's marriage and Blackwell's history. Thomas had written to his lawyer friend again, requesting more specific advice about how to legally establish Clara's independence. "The school term starts next Monday," Clara said. "Once I'm established as the teacher, it will be harder for Blackwell to claim I'm his runaway wife." "That's true," Miller agreed. "The town council has already approved your appointment. They'd be reluctant to go back on that, even with Blackwell's influence." As the days passed, Clara threw herself into preparing for the school term while Thomas learned the duties of a deputy. They saw each other daily, shared meals when possible, and found moments of normalcy amidst the ongoing tension of waiting for Blackwell's next move. It came sooner than expected. On Sunday evening, as Clara was reviewing her lessons for the first day of school, a knock sounded at her door. Thinking it was Thomas, she opened it without hesitation, only to find herself face to face with Edmund Blackwell. He looked different than she remembered, more controlled, almost cordial. But his eyes were cold as winter as he removed his hat. "Good evening, Mrs. Blackwell," he said smoothly. "May I come in?" Clara's hand tightened on the door. "My name is Miss Sutton, and no, you may not." Blackwell's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I understand you're upset. The shock of our wedding, the responsibilities of being a rancher's wife, it was a lot to take in all at once. I should have given you more time to adjust." Clara stared at him in disbelief. Was this his strategy now, to pretend the brutality had never happened? "Mr. Blackwell, I am not your wife. I never consented to marry you, and according to territorial law, no valid marriage exists between us." His expression hardened. "Your father accepted my payment. We spoke vows before a minister. You signed the marriage certificate." "Under duress," Clara replied, finding strength in her anger. "And apparently that certificate was never filed with the proper authorities." Blackwell's facade of pleasantness slipped, revealing the rage beneath. "You think legal technicalities will save you? You're mine, Clara. I paid for you fair and square. People can't be bought and sold, Mr. Blackwell, not even in Montana territory." His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with bruising force. "You think that Cowboy will protect you? He couldn't even protect his own sister." Clara's blood ran cold, so Blackwell knew about Eliza. Before she could respond, footsteps sounded on the stairs and Thomas appeared behind Blackwell, his hand resting on his sidearm. "Let her go, Blackwell," he said quietly. "Now." For a moment, Clara thought Blackwell might refuse, might escalate the confrontation. But after a tense second, he released her wrist and stepped back, a smile spreading across his face that chilled Clara to the bone. "Deputy Yates," he acknowledged, turning to face Thomas. "How's your new career in law enforcement? Must be quite a change from ranching." "Of course, it's hard to ranch without a home or cattle." Thomas's expression remained impassive, though Clara could see the muscle ticking in his jaw. "You're in town late, Blackwell. Any particular reason?" "Just paying a visit to my wife," Blackwell replied smoothly. "Trying to sort out this unfortunate misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," Thomas said. "Miss Sutton is the town's new schoolteacher. She's made her wishes clear. I suggest you respect them." Blackwell laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Or what, deputy? You'll arrest me for speaking to my own wife. Good luck with that." He put his hat back on, tipping it mockingly toward Clara. "We'll continue this conversation another time, my dear, when we have more privacy." With that, he descended the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the quiet evening air. Thomas waited until he was gone before turning to Clara, concern etched on his face. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" Clara rubbed her wrist where Blackwell's fingers had dug in. "I'm fine, but Thomas, he mentioned Eliza. He knows about your sister." Thomas's expression darkened. "He's trying to intimidate us. Don't let him succeed." Clara invited him inside, no longer caring about appearances. "What do we do now? He knows where I am, and he's not giving up." Thomas paced the small room, thinking, "Tomorrow's your first day of school. You need to go forward as planned, establish yourself here. I'll make sure either Sheriff Miller or I keep an eye on the school throughout the day." "And after that?" Clara asked. "I can't hide forever." "No," Thomas agreed. "We need to resolve this permanently." He stopped pacing, his decision made. "I'm going to Helena tomorrow after you're settled at the school. The territorial court is there. I'll speak directly to a judge, get a ruling on your marriage. With Sheriff Miller's statement about your condition when you arrived and the lack of proper documentation, we should be able to have the marriage invalidated." Clara nodded, though anxiety gnawed at her. "Will you be safe traveling alone? Blackwell has already demonstrated what he's willing to do." Thomas's eyes softened. "I'll be careful, and Miller will look after you while I'm gone." They sat together by the window, watching as night settled over the small town. Neither spoke of the growing feelings between them. It seemed wrong, somehow, with the shadow of Blackwell still looming over them. Yet it was there in the way Thomas gently examined her bruised wrist, in how Clara's hand lingered on his shoulder when she finally bid him good night. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect day for the start of the school term. Clara dressed carefully in her best dress, one borrowed from Sarah Jensen, who had become a fast friend. She arranged her hair neatly and packed the lunch misses. Wilson had prepared for her, determined to focus on her pupils rather than her fears. Thomas escorted her to the schoolhouse, where several children were already waiting with their parents. "I'll leave for Helena once I see you safely inside," he told her quietly. "I should be back by tomorrow evening," Clara nodded, suddenly reluctant to see him go. "Be careful, Thomas, please." His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. "Always." With a tip of his hat, he was gone, striding toward the livery where his horse waited. The school day passed in a blur of introductions, assessments, and establishing routines. Clara had 27 pupils ranging from 6 to 16 years old, with varying levels of previous education. Some could barely write their names, while others had clearly benefited from consistent schooling before their families moved west. She found herself enjoying the challenges of teaching, the bright faces looking up at her with curiosity and occasional mischief. For hours at a time, she was able to forget about Blackwell, about her precarious situation, about the danger that still threatened. At the end of the day, as the children filed out, Sheriff Miller appeared at the schoolhouse door. "Thought I'd walk you home, Miss Sutton," he said casually, though Clara didn't miss the way his eyes scanned the street. "Thank you, Sheriff. That's very kind." As they walked the short distance to her lodgings, Miller briefed her on Thomas's departure. "He got off safely, should reach Helena by tomorrow morning if the weather holds. I've arranged for a couple of the townsmen I trust to take turns watching your place tonight." Clara was touched by these precautions. "Do you really think Blackwell would try something in town?" "I think Blackwell is a man used to getting what he wants," Miller replied grimly. "And men like that are most dangerous when they're thwarted." That night, Clara slept fitfully, waking at every creak and night sound. She found herself missing Thomas's reassuring presence acutely, worried about his journey and what he might face in Helena. Would a territorial judge listen to him? Would legal procedures be enough to free her from Blackwell's claim? The second day of school went more smoothly than the first. The children were beginning to respond to her teaching style, and Clara found genuine joy in their progress. Sarah Jensen invited her to dinner that evening, providing welcome company and distraction from her worries. Thomas did not return the next day as expected, nor the day after. Clara tried to focus on her teaching, but anxiety gnawed at her with each passing hour. Had something happened to him on the road? Had Blackwell's men intercepted him? On the evening of the third day, Sheriff Miller appeared at her door, his expression grave. "I just got a telegram from the sheriff in Helena," he said without preamble. "Thomas was attacked outside the courthouse yesterday. He's alive but injured." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. "How badly?" The message didn't say, just that he's in the doctor's care and unable to travel for now. Miller's eyes were sympathetic. "He did manage to file the petition with the court before the attack. The hearing is scheduled for next week." Clara sank into a chair, her mind racing. It was Blackwell's doing, it had to be. "Almost certainly," Miller agreed, "but proving it is another matter. The sheriff in Helena is investigating, but so far no witnesses have come forward." Clara made a decision then, rising to her feet. "I need to go to him. I can take the stage tomorrow after school." Miller shook his head. "That's not safe, Miss Sutton. You'd be too vulnerable on the road." "I can't just sit here while Thomas is hurt because of me," Clara protested. "The best thing you can do for Thomas is stay safe and continue what he started," Miller insisted. "Keep teaching. Establish your place here." Don't give Blackwell any opportunity to claim you abandoned your position or acted improperly. Clara knew he was right, but the thought of Thomas lying injured while she went about her daily routine was almost unbearable. Will you send a telegram? Let him know I'm thinking of him. Miller's expression softened. Of course, I'll do it first thing in the morning. The next few days crawled by, each hour stretching endlessly as Clara divided her time between teaching and worrying. Miller received updates from Helena Thomas was recovering. The investigation into his attack continued without progress, and the court hearing was still scheduled, on Sunday afternoon. As Clara was returning from church, she spotted a familiar figure sitting on the steps of her lodgings. Her heart leapt as she recognized Thomas, though his appearance shocked her. His left arm was in a sling, a nasty bruise colored his jaw, and he moved gingerly as he rose to greet her. "Thomas," she exclaimed, rushing forward, "you're supposed to be recovering in Helena." He smiled despite his obvious discomfort. "I recovered enough to travel, couldn't stay away." Clara helped him up the stairs to her rooms, noting how he winced with each step. "What happened? Sheriff Miller said you were attacked." "Jumped by 3 men as I was leaving the courthouse," Thomas confirmed, easing himself into a chair. "Professional job, they knew what they were doing. Didn't say a word, just beat me thoroughly and left me in an alley." Clara's hands trembled as she poured him a cup of tea. "Blackwell's men." "Almost certainly, though nothing to prove it." He accepted the tea gratefully. "But they were too late. I'd already filed the petition and spoken to Judge Harrison. He's sympathetic to your case." Hope flickered in Clara's chest. "Then there's a chance, more than a chance," Thomas assured her. "The judge was disturbed by the circumstances of your marriage. The fact that the certificate was never properly filed works in our favor. And apparently, this isn't the first time concerns about Blackwell have reached the territorial court." They discussed the upcoming hearing, the evidence they would present, and the possibility of Clara traveling to Helena to testify. Throughout the conversation, Clara couldn't help noticing how Thomas's gaze lingered on her face, how his voice softened when he spoke her name. "I was worried about you," she admitted finally. "When you didn't return, I feared the worst." "I'm harder to get rid of than that," Thomas replied with a small smile. "Besides, I had a powerful reason to make it back." His blue eyes met hers, and Clara felt a flutter in her chest. "What reason was that?" Instead of answering, Thomas slowly reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "I think you know, Clara." The air between them seemed to vibrate with unspoken feelings. Clara leaned forward slightly, drawn by a force she couldn't name. Thomas mirrored her movement, his eyes dropping to her lips. The moment was shattered by a sharp knock at the door. They pulled apart as Sheriff Miller's voice called, "Miss Sutton, Thomas, I saw you come up. We need to talk." With a sigh, Thomas released her hand and Clara went to open the door. Miller entered, his expression troubled. "Just got word from a friend in Blackwell's outfit," he said without preamble. "Blackwell's gathered a dozen men. They're planning something big. My friend couldn't get details, but it's happening soon." The peaceful atmosphere vanished, replaced by the familiar tension of impending danger. "Does he know Thomas is back?" Clara asked. "If not, he will soon," Miller replied. "This town's too small for secrets." Thomas struggled to his feet, wincing at the movement. "We need to prepare." "If Blackwell's planning a show of force." "Already on it," Miller assured him. "I've deputized 6 men I trust. They'll be patrolling in shifts starting tonight, and I've sent for help from the U.S. Marshal in Bozeman." Clara looked between the 2 men. "What can I do?" "Keep teaching," Thomas said firmly. "Show this town and Blackwell that you're here to stay, that you're not afraid." But Clara was afraid more than she wanted to admit. Not for herself, but for Thomas, for Sheriff Miller, for the town that had welcomed her. How many more people would be hurt in Blackwell's obsessive pursuit of her? That night, Clara lay awake listening to the sound of boots on the boardwalk below as Miller's deputies patrolled. Across the street, a lamp burned in the sheriff's office where Thomas was sleeping, his injuries still too painful for him to take a patrol shift. Morning brought no relief from the tension. Clara went to school as usual, but noticed parents lingering longer than normal, men with rifles standing casually on street corners, an unusual number of horses tied outside the saloon. The entire town seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. The children were restless, picking up on the adults' anxiety. Clara did her best to maintain a normal routine, but found herself glancing frequently at the window, starting at sudden noises. Shortly after the noon recess, the door to the schoolhouse opened. Clara turned, expecting to see a late-returning student, but instead found herself facing Edmund Blackwell, flanked by two of his men. "Class dismissed," Blackwell announced, his voice filling the small room. "Children, run along home now." The pupils looked to Clara in confusion. She straightened her shoulders, determined not to show fear. "Mr. Blackwell, you have no authority here. Children, please remain seated." Blackwell's eyes hardened. "I won't ask again." One of his men moved his coat aside, deliberately revealing the gun at his hip. The children's eyes widened with fear. Clara swallowed her anger. "Children, you're dismissed early today. Please go directly home and stay there until your parents come for you." The pupils filed out quickly, many casting worried glances back at their teacher. When the last child had gone, Clara faced Blackwell, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "What do you want?" "You know exactly what I want," Blackwell replied. "This charade has gone on long enough. You're coming home with me today." "This isn't a charade, Mr. Blackwell. This is my life. My choice, and I choose not to be with you." Blackwell took a step toward her, his expression darkening. "Your choice. Women don't get choices out here, Clara. They take what's offered and they're grateful for it." "That might be how it works on your ranch," Clara replied, "but not in the rest of the world, not anymore." His hand shot out, grabbing her arm. "We're leaving now." Before Clara could respond, the schoolhouse door opened again. Thomas stood in the doorway, his injured arm still in a sling but his right hand resting on his gun. Behind him, Sheriff Miller and 3 deputies fanned out, all armed. "Let her go, Blackwell," Thomas said, his voice deadly quiet. "You're trespassing in the town schoolhouse and assaulting the teacher. That's enough to put you in jail right there." Blackwell smiled, though his grip on Clara's arm didn't loosen. "I'm simply retrieving my wife, who appears to be suffering from some confusion about her marital status." "The territorial court will decide her status next week," Miller interjected. "Until then, Miss Sutton remains under this town's protection." "Such concern for one schoolteacher," Blackwell observed. "I wonder why that is." His eyes narrowed as he looked at Thomas. "Perhaps Deputy Yates has developed more than a professional interest." "Is that it, Thomas? You want what's mine, just like I had what was yours." Thomas's face paled, and Clara realized with sickening clarity what Blackwell was implying about Eliza. Before she could process this, Blackwell continued, his voice conversational but edged with malice. "Did she tell you how eager she was to marry me? How she signed the certificate without hesitation when she saw the money I offered her father? Money I've now lost, along with valuable time." His fingers dug painfully into Clara's arm. "I don't take kindly to being cheated." "I never wanted to marry you," Clara said, finding her voice. "My father accepted your offer without my knowledge or consent, and when I tried to refuse, you threatened to ruin him." "A business arrangement, nothing more," Blackwell replied dismissively. "One you agreed to when you spoke the vows." "Under duress," Clara insisted. "And then you showed your true nature on our wedding night. Did you tell them about that, Mr. Blackwell?" "About how you beat me when I wouldn't submit to you." A flash of anger crossed Blackwell's face. "A husband has the right to discipline his wife." "Not in my jurisdiction," Sheriff Miller said firmly. "Now let her go or I'll arrest you for assault." For a tense moment, no one moved. Clara could feel Blackwell's fingers bruising her arm, could sense the coiled violence in his body. Then, abruptly, he released her, stepping back with a cold smile. "Very well. We'll let the court decide." His eyes found Thomas. "But remember, Deputy, you've already lost everything once. How much more are you willing to lose?" With that, he nodded to his men and they exited the schoolhouse, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. Clara rubbed her arm where Blackwell's fingers had gripped, trying to slow her racing heart. "Are you all right?" Thomas asked, crossing to her side. Clara nodded, though she felt far from all right. "What did he mean about losing everything once? Is he threatening you again?" Thomas exchanged a glance with Sheriff Miller. "He's threatening everyone," Miller said grimly. "My deputies have spotted at least 15 of his men in town. They're staying at the hotel, the boarding house, drinking in the saloon, all armed." "He's planning something," Thomas agreed. "This confrontation was just the opening move." Clara looked between them, fear constricting her throat. "What do? We stay vigilant," Miller replied. "I've sent another telegram to the marshal, urging him to hurry. In the meantime, we keep up appearances. School continues tomorrow if you're willing, Miss Sutton." Clara hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I won't be intimidated out of doing my job." "That's the spirit," Miller approved. "Thomas will stay close to the schoolhouse tomorrow, and I'll have men watching Blackwell's crew." That night, Clara insisted Thomas join her for dinner in her lodgings. His injuries were clearly bothering him after the confrontation, and she wanted to check on him away from the curious eyes of the townsfolk. "You should rest that arm," she chided gently as he winced while sitting at her small table. "The doctor and Helena must have told you to take it easy." "Something like that," Thomas admitted with a rueful smile, "but sitting around isn't a luxury we can afford right now." Clara set a simple meal before him, stew from Mrs. Wilson's kitchen and bread she had baked herself. "What Blackwell said about your sister," she began hesitantly. Thomas's expression darkened. He was implying he had relations with Eliza. Whether that's true or another of his manipulations, I don't know. Eliza never spoke of it. Clara reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "I'm sorry he used her memory like that. It was cruel." Thomas turned his hand, catching her fingers in his. "Blackwell knows cruelty better than most. It's his native language." He squeezed her hand. "But he doesn't understand strength like yours or courage." "I don't feel very courageous," Clara admitted. "Mostly I feel afraid." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," Thomas replied softly. "It's acting despite it, like you did today, standing up to him in front of your students." Their eyes met across the table, and Clara felt that same pull she had experienced before Miller's interruption. This time there was no knock at the door to break the spell. Thomas leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, Clara closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a gentle, questioning kiss. It lasted only a moment, but when they parted, something had fundamentally changed. The connection that had been building between them since that dawn meeting at the fence was now acknowledged, tangible. "I never expected this," Clara whispered, her hand still entwined with his. "When I ran through those fields, I was only thinking of escape, not of finding. Something worth running toward." Thomas finished for her, a smile softening his features. Clara nodded, returning his smile. "Exactly that." The moment of tenderness was brief, overshadowed by the reality of their situation. They spoke late into the night, planning for the coming days, for the court hearing, for the possibility that Blackwell might attempt something more direct than intimidation. The next morning, Clara rose early, determined to maintain normalcy despite the tension in the air. She prepared for school as usual, gathering her books and lesson plans. Thomas escorted her to the schoolhouse, where parents were already bringing their children, many looking nervous but resolute. "Word has spread about yesterday," Thomas observed as they watched the pupils file in. "But they're still coming." "Of course they are," Clara replied. "Education is too important to sacrifice to fear." Thomas smiled, his eyes warm as they met hers. "Be careful today, I'll be nearby." The school day proceeded without incident, though Clara remained on edge, starting at every sound from outside. The children were subdued, whispering among themselves about the strange men in town and yesterday's early dismissal. At the end of the day, as Clara was cleaning the blackboard, Sarah Jensen appeared at the door. "I thought you might like some company on your walk home," she said. "My husband's one of the men Sheriff Miller deputized. He told me to stay close to you if I could." Clara accepted the offer gratefully, appreciating both the protection and the friendship. As they walked, Sarah confided that many of the townswomen had organized a rotation, ensuring Clara wouldn't be alone during daylight hours. "We take care of our own," Sarah explained simply. "And you're one of us now." The show of solidarity touched Clara deeply. She had come to Silver Creek as a stranger, yet in just weeks, she had found a community willing to stand beside her against a powerful enemy. That evening, Thomas brought news that the U.S. Marshal was expected to arrive the next day, bringing with him official papers from the territorial court regarding Clara's case. "Judge Harrison has issued a preliminary ruling," Thomas reported, his expression lighter than it had been in days. "Based on the evidence I presented and the telegrams Sheriff Miller sent, he's declared that no valid marriage exists between you and Blackwell." Clara's eyes widened. "Is that final? Am I truly free of him?" "The formal hearing is still scheduled for next week," Thomas cautioned, "where Blackwell will have a chance to present his side. But this preliminary ruling means you're under the court's protection until then. Blackwell has no legal claim to you." For the first time since her escape, Clara felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The law, the very institution she had doubted would protect her, had recognized her right to choose her own path. The next day brought clear skies and a sense of anticipation. Clara taught her morning lessons with renewed energy, the children responding to her brightened mood. At noon, a commotion in the street drew everyone to the windows. The U.S. Marshal had arrived, his presence marked by a fine horse and the glint of a silver badge on his chest. Sheriff Miller met him outside the jail, and soon Thomas joined them. Clara watched from the schoolhouse as the three men conferred, then entered the sheriff's office together. She turned back to her pupils, trying to focus on their arithmetic lesson while her mind raced with possibilities. After school, Thomas came to escort her to the sheriff's office, his expression unreadable. "Marshal Richardson wants to speak with you," he explained as they walked. "He's brought the court papers." Inside, Clara was introduced to the marshal, a weathered man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Miss Sutton," he greeted her, "I've heard quite a bit about your situation." "I hope some of it was good, sir," Clara replied with a small smile. The marshal's eyes crinkled. "Judge Harrison speaks highly of your case. He's issued this restraining order against Edmund Blackwell." He handed her an official-looking document. "This prohibits him from approaching you or interfering with your duties as schoolteacher until the formal hearing." Clara accepted the paper, hope warring with skepticism. "Will a piece of paper stop a man like Blackwell?" "No," the marshal replied candidly. "But it gives us the legal authority to arrest him if he violates it, and I'll be staying in town until the hearing to ensure it's enforced." The news was reassuring, yet Clara couldn't shake the feeling that Blackwell wouldn't be deterred by legal niceties. Thomas seemed to share her concern, remaining vigilant as he walked her back to her lodgings. "What happens now?" Clara asked as they paused at her door. "We wait," Thomas replied. "The marshal's presence changes things. Blackwell would be a fool to try anything with federal law enforcement in town." "And is Blackwell a fool?" Clara asked quietly. Thomas considered this. "No, but he is proud, and pride makes men do foolish things." That night, Clara slept more soundly than she had in weeks, the restraining order tucked safely in her bureau drawer and the knowledge of the marshal's presence in town providing a sense of security. She dreamed of a future without fear, teaching her students, building a life in Silver Creek, perhaps even exploring the growing feelings between her and Thomas. She was awakened before dawn by the smell of smoke. Disoriented, Clara sat up in bed, her mind flashing back to the destruction of Thomas's ranch. Then she heard shouting from the street below and the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Throwing on a shawl over her nightgown, Clara rushed to the window. What she saw sent ice through her veins. The general store across the street was engulfed in flames, and men on horseback were galloping through town, firing into the air and at buildings. In the chaos, She could make out Thomas and Sheriff Miller taking cover behind water troughs, returning fire. Other townsmen had emerged from their homes, rifles in hand. The U.S. Marshal was directing a group of men trying to form a bucket line to fight the fire. A pounding at her door made her jump. "Clara, are you in there?" Sarah Jensen's voice called urgently. Clara flung open the door to find Sarah, her face streaked with soot, clutching her young son to her chest. "Blackwell's men are burning the town," Sarah gasped. "They've set fires at both ends of the street. My husband sent me to get you. We need to evacuate to the church on the hill." Clara moved quickly, pulling on a dress and grabbing her most important possessions, the restraining order, her mother's locket, the small amount of money she had saved from her teaching salary. As she and Sarah hurried down the stairs, a bullet splintered the wood beside them. "They're watching for you," Sarah realized with horror. "They know this is where you live." Clara made a split-second decision. "Take your son to the church. I'll draw them away from the other women and children." "That's madness," Sarah protested. "They'll kill you." "They want me alive," Clara replied grimly. "Or Blackwell does, at least. Go, Sarah. Please." Reluctantly, Sarah fled with her child, joining a group of women and children making their way up the hill toward the church. Clara moved in the opposite direction, keeping to the shadows, looking for a way to reach Thomas and the sheriff. The scene in the main street was apocalyptic. The general store was fully engulfed now, flames leaping high into the pre-dawn sky. The saloon was burning as well, and men were fighting both the fires and each other. Clara could make out Blackwell's men by their matching bandanas, facing off against the townspeople who were determined to defend their homes. As she edged along the side of a building, trying to reach the relative safety of the jail, a hand grabbed her arm. Clara whirled, ready to fight, and found herself face to face with Edmund Blackwell. "There you are," he said, his voice almost pleasant despite the chaos around them. "Time to go home, Clara." Clara twisted in his grip. "This is your doing. You're burning an entire town just to get to me." Blackwell's smile was cold. "I told you I don't take kindly to being cheated. The town chose to protect you. Now they pay the price." He began dragging her toward a waiting horse. "We're leaving. Now." "Let her go, Blackwell." Thomas stood in the street, his gun aimed steadily at Blackwell despite his injured arm. Behind him, Sheriff Miller and the marshal were engaged in firefights with Blackwell's men. Blackwell pulled Clara against his chest, using her as a shield. "You still haven't learned, have you, Yates? You can't protect the women in your life, not your sister and not Clara." "The difference," Thomas replied, his voice deadly calm, "is that Clara chose me. Eliza never chose you." Something in Blackwell snapped at these words. "She would have," he snarled, "if she hadn't been so stubborn, so unwilling to see what I was offering her." In that moment of rage, his grip on Clara loosened just enough. She drove her elbow back into his stomach with all her strength, breaking free as he doubled over. Thomas lunged forward, tackling Blackwell to the ground despite his injured arm. The two men struggled in the dirt, each landing blows as Clara scrambled away. Around them, the tide of the battle was turning. The marshal and his hastily deputized townsmen were gaining the upper hand against Blackwell's hired guns. Clara watched in horror as Blackwell gained the advantage, pinning Thomas beneath him and drawing a knife from his boot. Without thinking, she grabbed a piece of burning debris from the edge of the fire and swung it at Blackwell's back. He screamed as his jacket caught fire, rolling away from Thomas to extinguish the flames. In that moment, Marshal Richardson appeared, his gun trained on Blackwell's chest. "It's over, Blackwell," the marshal announced. "Your men are surrendering or fleeing. Drop the knife." For a moment it seemed Blackwell might refuse, might choose death over defeat, but self-preservation won out and he tossed the knife aside, his face a mask of hatred as he glared at Clara. "You'll regret this," he spat. "Both of you. The only regret here is that it took so long to bring you to justice," the marshal replied, handcuffing Blackwell. "Edmund Blackwell, you're under arrest for arson, attempted murder, and violation of a federal restraining order." As the marshal led Blackwell away, Clara rushed to Thomas's side. He was struggling to sit up, his face bloodied from the fight. "Are you hurt?" she asked, helping him to his feet. "Nothing that won't heal," he assured her, though he winced as he straightened. His eyes scanned her face anxiously. "What about you? Did he hurt you?" Clara shook her head, suddenly overwhelmed by everything that had happened. The town. So much destruction. Thomas pulled her gently into his arms, and Clara leaned into his strength, the reality of their survival washing over her. Around them, the townspeople were bringing the fires under control, tending to the injured, securing the remaining members of Blackwell's gang. "We'll rebuild," Thomas murmured against her hair. "Silver Creek is stronger than Blackwell knew." In the days that followed, the truth of his words became evident. The town rallied, neighbors helping neighbors clear debris and begin reconstruction. Clara's schoolhouse had been spared the worst of the damage, and she resumed teaching in just 3 days, providing the children with a sense of normalcy amidst the recovery efforts. Blackwell and his men were transported to Helena for trial, facing multiple charges that would ensure they spent years in territorial prison. The formal hearing regarding Clara's marriage was held as scheduled, and Judge Harrison's final ruling confirmed what they already knew. No valid marriage had ever existed between Clara Sutton and Edmund Blackwell. As summer turned to fall, Silver Creek began to heal. The rebuilt general store was larger than before, and a new saloon opened with a fancy piano brought all the way from St. Louis. Clara's school flourished, with new pupils arriving as word spread of the quality of education she provided. Thomas, fully recovered from his injuries, declined Sheriff Miller's offer of a permanent deputy position. "I'm a rancher at heart," he explained to Clara as they walked along the creek one golden afternoon. "I've found some land east of town. It's good grazing country with plenty of water and shelter for cattle." "You're starting over," Clara observed, admiring his resilience. Thomas smiled, taking her hand in his, in more ways than one. He stopped walking, turning to face her. "I know it hasn't been long, and we've faced more in these few months than most couples face in years, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Clara's heart quickened as Thomas knelt before her, still holding her hand. "Clara Sutton, you ran through those fields at dawn seeking freedom and found your way to my fence. I told you then that you were free, but I had no idea that in freeing you, I would find my own liberty from grief, from bitterness, from the past that had haunted me for so long." Tears filled Clara's eyes as he continued, his voice deep with emotion. "I love you. I love your courage, your kindness, your determination. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife not because anyone says you must, but because you choose to?" "Yes," Clara whispered, joy bubbling up within her like a spring. "Yes, Thomas, I choose you. I love you." He rose to his feet, gathering her in his arms for a kiss that promised a lifetime of chosen love, of partnership built on mutual respect and shared dreams. They were married that November in the newly rebuilt church, with the entire town in attendance. Sarah Jensen stood as Clara's attendant, and Sheriff Miller served as Thomas's best man. The U.S. Marshal returned for the occasion, bringing news that Blackwell had been sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison for his crimes. As winter settled over the Montana territory, Clara and Thomas moved into the small cabin they had built together on their new ranch. It wasn't grand, just 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen for now, but to Clara it was paradise. Each board had been placed by choice, each piece of furniture selected together. Nothing imposed, nothing demanded, everything freely given. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell gently outside their window, they sat before the fire. Clara nestled against Thomas's chest as he read aloud from one of the books that had been a wedding gift from her students. "Are you happy?" Thomas asked during a pause in the reading, his arm tightening around her. Clara tilted her face up to his, thinking of the journey that had brought her here from desperate flight through wheat fields at dawn to this moment of perfect contentment. "Completely," she replied, reaching up to touch his beloved face. Because I am exactly where I choose to be. Outside, the Montana winter worked its quiet magic on the landscape, covering scars and preparing the earth for new growth. And inside the warm cabin, two people who had found each other against all odds dreamed of the spring to come, of the life they would build together, of the children who might one day fill these rooms with laughter. Clara had escaped through the fields at dawn, and a cowboy had met her at the fence and said, "You're free now." But the true freedom, they both understood, was in what had come after the choice to love, to trust, to build something lasting in a wild and beautiful land that rewarded courage and perseverance with its greatest treasures.